Welcome to day 3, session 2 of the 11th annual SISE conference. By the way, to all the SISE 11 fellows, you guys, you're just phenomenal, fantastic, great, wonderful, brilliant, thoughtful questions. We've been covering a lot of challenging topics, issues, and yet you keep pushing us. Thank you to all the fellows, and thank you to everyone who is attending also on the delay feed. We keep setting new event engager records, somewhere in the 32,000 range. Katie, you're going to have to help me calculate all the different totals, but it's been pretty impressive. The only thing is that tomorrow we'll break the new record again with the release of the Denmark Energy Ecosystem app. That will be a fun moment as well. With so many panels that have preceded this one, I'm not going to bother with another rapid fire review. Suffice it to say, please visit the archives for all panel recordings. The questions and conversations inspired by the fellows and the audience have been brilliant. There are many themes that have run through all these panels. The time for action is now. Our gigaton challenges require collective action, that capital markets and democratic processes could be more creative. And of course, there's been a lot of conversation about technology too. But we're beginning to see a pattern, a tendency, in fact, to chase the new or next shiny object. Yes, there's a need for new urban transportation systems and more streamlined utility regulatory processes and more creative public-private investment and capital. But these are examples of big systemic solutions that we've been discussing at SISE 11. Perhaps there's a bigger opportunity. From what I understand from our next panelists, and I hope I don't steal your line, Youssef and Nikki, but as I understand it, people spend about 90% of their time inside buildings. In other words, the built environment offers a huge opportunity to make corrective changes to the climate crisis. This is the topic, the built environment, that will be the focus of our next panel. Youssef Mestari is Chief Marketing Officer and Nikki Mehta is Director of Energy and Sustainability, both at Honeywell Building Technologies. Youssef and Nikki, sometimes I wonder if the built environment is Occam's razor for sustainability. The best solution is often the most obvious one, that in the pursuit of new shiny objects, we might be missing our greatest opportunities in the built environment. Youssef and Nikki, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate the introduction and really glad to have this opportunity to meet with you today and discuss a little bit of what we've been working at Honeywell, but overall what we've been seeing in the market in the pursuit of sustainability for the built environment. Before we get there, I just want to take maybe 1 minute to introduce who's Honeywell, because it's an S&P 500 company, yet as we serve mostly B2B businesses, therefore it's not a very well-known company to the consumer. Let's take 1 minute and introduce that. Nikki, you want to go to the next slide? Thank you. Right, so Honeywell is about, ballpark number about around $40 billion revenue company every year. And we serve, we develop and deploy software and technologies across multiple industries. The big 4 industries where we focus on are the following: aerospace, which is the biggest one. So everyone has touched Honeywell Technologies in their life without knowing it. So every time you take a flight in a plane, there is Honeywell technology embedded in the air circulation, and then the cockpit and the flight management system is done by Honeywell. Every time you go fishing, the rod been made by Honeywell, and every time we have a soldier in the front line, the bulletproof jacket are made by Honeywell. That's the performance material technologies, where we do from performance materials, but also from distribution control system that control all the processes for manufacturing and process industries. We also have safety and productivity solutions. So every time you buy something from Amazon, you got in touch with Honeywell Technologies, where we had the sorting and the triage of those boxes moving at a very fast speed. We also, when you book your meal at McDonald's and others, those similar devices that you see every teller with on their ear, it's a Honeywell Technologies, where you go and scan your product in Walmart or Home Depot. That's also a Honeywell Technologies. So we are in a very wide range of technologies. And the last one is the building technology, which is, this is where we come from, Nikki and myself. We represent building technology, which is at a $6 billion revenue. And we focus on the building automation and control. So basically how we can integrate all the cooling systems, security system, access control system, fire system, and light management system for a building. Now, initially we started by just the control. It's in a simple way, it's a closed loop system control where we basically you set the temperature and it managed to maintain that temperature in the building. Building Technologies is the inventor of the thermostat. If you remember in the 70s, well, for your parents maybe, or everyone, those are like the small ring thermostat of Honeywell. That's the first controlled thermostat ever invented. And we carried that innovative mindset throughout today. And we're very excited to tell you what are the next challenges and problems we are putting our heads and talents together to crack. So let's get into what is the problem we're going to talk about today and what are the solutions. Before we get there, I just want to introduce myself and Nikki. I am Youssef Mestari. I lead the sustainability business for Building Solutions. We focus mostly in developing solutions, services, and technologies that will help building owners and building operators to reduce their energy bill and reduce their carbon emissions. So that's our mission statement, and our goal and vision is to make every building a net zero building. And the team is working hard at work to put that roadmap and innovations just to deliver that vision. And Nikki, you want to maybe introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Youssef. Good day, everyone. My name is Nikki Mehta, and I am responsible for offer management for energy and sustainability solutions at Honeywell. And what that really means is that I focus on how we can take many of the innovative technologies that we have within Honeywell Business Technologies across our fire, BMS, software, and security divisions, how we can take those different technologies, further innovate them to help you reduce your carbon emissions and your energy consumption. Thank you, Youssef.
Thanks. All right, so what is the problem we're trying to solve today, or at least in, not today during the session, but at least, in today's environment? As Eric mentioned, we as human beings, we spend about 90% of our time in our lifetime in buildings, whether it's at home, whether it's the school, whether it's a mall or an office. With the reality is we spend 90%. Now, if you go to the next slide, now, what is that contribution across all the buildings on Earth? Are they really producing CO2? Because when we think about CO2 emissions, we really think about that dark cloud and smoke coming to the air, and mostly goes associated. Our thought get associated to cars and trucks and boats. But the reality is the buildings and all the CO2 emissions that are generated due to the electricity and the cooling system and the heating system in buildings are causing more CO2 emissions than transport. In fact, globally, we are more than 1/3, 36% of global CO2 emissions on Earth are produced by buildings. And in fact, it's the biggest emitters of CO2 in the world. The transport, when you add everything from cars to planes to boats and shipping docks and everything, that comes to 33%. 34%, and the rest is about 33%. So this is how we're trying to sort of, it gives you the size of the pie. What is the impact at stake if we manage to make every building a net zero building? That's 36% less emission in the world, and that's what excites us every day and makes us wake up. Maybe next slide. Now, and this is not only a problem, but it's also a mandate. It's a mandate today by our investors, by the shareholders, by the consumers and the customers. Sustainability become increasingly important, and it adds a advantage in terms of competitive pricing, in terms of you can sell sustainable product at a premium. You can value a sustainable company at a premium compared to a similar company that is not sustainable. And the reason behind that is just because you have a bigger pool of investors that also include ESG, environment and social and governance investors that focus mostly on putting money in ESG focused companies, and therefore you have more money flow into those companies. So you would see, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. This is an increasingly important topic for a big corporation. So what are they doing about it? What's their agenda to deliver that sustainability promise to their employee, to their shareholder, and to their customers? Let's go to the next slide. And what is the journey? So, and we're going to share with you sort of the learning that we had. We've been serving this market in terms of energy efficiency, for more than 10 years, and we put a more focus on sustainability and how we can reduce furthermore the CO2 emissions beyond just reducing the kilowatt hour. And what we've learned from customers is the following. There is basically the customers that we've talked to, they're all embarking in a journey that can be summarized into 6 steps. Next slide. The first step is they're trying to understand their baseline. What's their consumption today, so they can define a path for the future. So that's the very first step. And surprisingly enough, not all customers know their baseline. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And we have a deep dive on each of these ones. Once you know the baseline, the second step is about defining the targets. Where do you want to get to? And again, here, there are different type of customers with different needs, drive different target agenda. And we'll explain a little bit what we mean by that. Next, once the target is defined, is about the journey. How do you get the from to roadmap? And therefore is building the walk. What are the things that needs to be deployed? The planification and prioritization of initiatives. And what are the initiatives at stake that have the biggest impact? And how do you prioritize them? We're going to talk about that. And then the next step is walk the walk. It's all about execution. So once we know what are the initiatives, how do you execute? And then we'll talk about the archetype we've seen with customers. How do they deploy the initiatives once they have those initiatives identified and financing and budgeting locked in? And last 2 is about the measurement and the monitoring, which is a continuous activity that allow you to make sure that you are on track and delivering against the target you've committed to. But in terms of specific actions to go through this process, the what actions you look at from the baselines to the target, they're all summarized at the bottom of this slide. In fact, there are very simple actions that doesn't change the behavior and the processes of a company. It's just about keep doing the same thing. But if they divest some of their assets, and think about like COVID, for example, with all the work from home, we've seen a lot of companies reducing the number of offices. Just by reducing the number of offices they have, it reduces their energy bill. And by reducing their energy bill, they reduce their CO2 consumptions. So footprint rationalization is the big one. Moving into building efficiency, which is basically about how can you operate better what you already have without having a CapEx, a capital expenditure investment. So basically, without changing your HVAC system, can you operate better at your HVAC system by knowing when someone is in the room and triggering the right temperature thresholds, and then reducing it or going into another range of temperature when there is nobody in the room, for example. So building efficiency is the second one. The third one is renewable power. The Fourth one is about major project, which is basically, this is where CapEx come into play, where you have to upgrade your systems, whether it's lighting system, whether it's HVAC system, whether it's putting a solar panel on the roof, and others. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it and give you a little bit more information in there. And then the last two are fleet efficiency. And that only depends on the profile of your customer, or basically the customer that we look at in terms of what's their assets. And that will detail a little bit more about, it's directly linked to the baseline and how we do the baselining with customers. So next slide. So the baseline is about understanding how much you consume. And therefore, when we talk to customers and say, okay, what's your baseline? It starts with understanding their asset base. What are the assets? And once we understand their assets, who are the ones that are consuming the most or producing the most of CO2? So therefore, you know who are the biggest emitters, and therefore you can define the right plan and the right targets giving that profile. So, and the profile is very particular to every single company. There is no company, two companies that have exact same profile, same type of emissions. I give you two extreme examples. If you think about a logistic company like FedEx, FedEx has a lot of transportation, a lot of small buildings, and a little bit of distribution centers, and a little bit of aviation. So you could see their profile is a little bit across all of these boxes that you see at the bottom, except factories. But if you look at Coca-Cola, for example, they have a lot of emissions coming from factories and then from the distribution from the trucks, but not much from, let's say, aviations or others. So understanding what are your biggest sources of emissions already is a one step towards defining the right actions that will get you the biggest impact in terms of CO2 emissions. Next slide. Now, once we understand like the baseline for our customer, the second thing we look at is like, what are the targets? And if you see, the first thing is, do you have a target? And the good news is we've seen a tremendous uptake in a science-based targets adopted by corporations. If you look at the chart on the top right, there were about less than 10 in 2015 companies in the US with science-based target for sustainability. In 2020, there are 800, and then in 2021, there is an additional 790 on top of it that are committing by the end of the year to become a science-based target. So you could see it's an exponential curve, and this is only the beginning, and you could expect this is just growing furthermore as the world take more responsibility and enforce regulations on sustainability target for the private sector. So there are more and more customers and companies with assets that are taking those, setting targets. But those targets could be different. You could set a target of net zero, like Apple did, like Amazon did, and Microsoft, or you could set targets of, let's say, 50% reduction or 30% reductions, like Home Depot did, for example. And others, they haven't really committed on a number. They have committed on we're going to reduce, we're going to invest that much money, but they didn't commit on a specific number to reduce. But it all depends on their strategy in terms of sustainability. Is it about that CO2 number that needs to go down? That's the first category, or personas of customers we've seen. Or is it based on ROI? They're only considering initiatives that will get that have a return on investment of less than 3 years or 5 years, and whatever that get them, that's going to be their target, for example. So that's another profile of companies we've seen. And others are literally just setting targets based on the regulation in play. If there is a pressure from regulation that says you have to meet these kind of standards, then they're just going to do the minimum required to meet those standards. So you would see the targets really are defined by sort of the kind of the strategy the company wants to take on sustainability. But also, I think one funny fact here is we've realized there is sort of a pattern of companies that have a direct exposure to the end consumer. They tend to commit more aggressively to targets. Like for any company you interact with, you as a person, and you buy, like we said, like Amazon or FedEx, you'll see there is a tendency to see much more aggressive targets and build that brand and brand recognition around clean company and sustainable company. But more you go in the back end, the more you see like companies that only work with other companies, names that you never heard of. And these companies only work with other businesses, and their product never gets to the end customers from the first line. Those companies tend to take less aggressive stance on the sustainability targets, and therefore are more into the cost minimizer, ROI maximizer, or regulatory compliance. Next slide. Thanks. Now, how do you build the wall? And this is exciting. So, and this is when you look at how do you get to your target, whatever it's 0% emissions or 20 or less 20% or whatever number the company set up. There are multiple initiatives, we call them ECMs, for energy conservation measures, that can get you there. Think about it this way, it's like point A to point B, and you can draw any type of line for any type of shape to get you from that point A to point B. But there is only one way that's going to get you to the fastest and the cheapest way and the shortest way. And that's exactly the same concept we're using for carbon emissions. You could apply so many different technologies that will help you reduce your carbon, but at what cost? And how much time do you need to implement all those things? So our goal when we engage with customers is really to define the fastest path, the most cost-efficient path to get there. So how does that work? If you look at this curve, we call it the abatement curve. We've ranked all the type of initiative we deployed for our customers, and that's our own project that we deployed. From experience, we've seen that the way you read it is the width of every rectangle is how much CO2 absorption that specific initiative can provide. So wider is the rectangle of specific initiatives, better it is. So you could see LED lighting retrofit, BMS, which is building management system upgrade, and solar power purchase agreement, for example, stand at one of the big threes that you would see that they have a tremendous impact. Now on the y-axis, what you could see, I think it's missing, it's about dollars, the dollar per metric ton of absorption. So how much does it cost to absorb that metric ton of CO2? Two different initiatives will not have the same cost to achieve the same impact. And that's sort of what you could see here. The fact that LED lighting, for example, is negative here, because it looks at the NPV, net present value, over 20 years. How much does it cost to change the lights to LED? And then over 20 years, how much saving you get out of that change? And then you do the NPV of all that. And if it's negative, that means you get more money than you've spent over 20 years. And in addition, you have saved energy and therefore reduce your carbon emissions. So that's why we see that's the first no regret move all companies start with when they want to start their journey. They literally start with the LED lighting. But on the other hand, when you deplete that potential of CO2 emissions from LED lighting, when you move to the next one, all of them are either have a very low impact, which increase your management costs and for very little impact, or have a different price point to achieve similar impact or even maybe less impact. And that's why you see when customers prioritize and they build their walk, they use this type of abatement curve to prioritize based on their budget, based on their CO2 emission targets, and based on the speed of deployment, what are the initiatives that will make the cut? And literally here, when you look at the metric ton CO2 reduced, the easy way to look at it is you can draw the line, a vertical line, whenever you set the target. If it's 100%, it's likely going to be at the very right side. But if you draw 20%, you probably can stop at the steam trap replacement or building envelope improvement and get you to your target. It's really like, what are the next initiatives you will have to take into consideration to get to the target you have set up. Next slide. So I'll skip this one, or maybe we'll just go mindful of time. I wanted to leave some time to answer a lot of questions I've seen upcoming. the walk. So once you see companies have defined their walk and selected the initiative based on that prioritization, there's basically two ways of proceeding. Number one is how much time do they have to deploy? There is two approach we've seen. There is the big bang approach, which is very rare because it requires high intensity in terms of management, resources, and capital. It's the big bang means you're gonna deploy everything you can, the shortest time you can. So basically you're managing multiple third parties and contractors across all those different initiatives and coordinating across all the building at once. The second one, which is the most popular one, is the wave approach, where you'd say they will pick one initiative and they will sort of deploy it, do a proof of concept, select a couple of sites to scale as wave one, and then move to another sort of a wave two with another set of buildings, making sure that each one capturing the biggest impact in terms of carbon emission reductions. And they leave the tail for those very small buildings with very minimal impact in terms of carbon emissions. They will either deprioritize them and only focus on those biggest ones that are consuming more. Now, there are two. Yeah, we can. If you go back to the previous slide.
Sorry.
No worries. The three things I think once you know the speed of your deployment and the speed of your deployment, how you deploy those initiatives that you've selected. As we said, you can pick one initiative and you roll it out. The next slide, yeah. You pick one initiative and you can roll it out across all your buildings or selected building. That's your approach number one. So you could see it's like the red represent that one initiative and you do it across all your buildings. The second approach is more a single building approach. You will pick one building and you will do every single initiative that you have identified that have significant impact in that building, and you only do that for that building or a subset of building, and then you move to a subset of another building, and then you repeat. So this requires a little bit more management and a higher cost because you're not tapping into your economy of scale. The first one, you buy, for example, LED for all your buildings, so you have volume and bargain power. If you have to do a purchase agreement and procurement for every single building, you lose that bargain power in approach number two. But at least it helps you to achieve net zero, for example, or achieve your target on select numbers of buildings much faster than approach number one. And the last one is approach number three, is about the initiative that are cherry picking, right? So when you look at the abatement curve, some companies will say, you know what, I'm just gonna do HVAC system in this building and do LED in that building. And they do a sort of a customized program as opposed to a standard replicable program. Do just cherry picking the right initiative to achieve the biggest impact at the lowest cost. And they will define the couple of buildings that will be targeted with what kind of initiative, and they will do this kind of mapping complex, which is it's a hybrid between approach one and approach two. That's about it. The last two, and I skip quickly, that are more about continuous measurement and monitoring, which is basically we're setting up a dashboard that collect the data of consumptions that allow you to understand in real time what's your baseline from the lump sum energy, but also broken down. What's your energy consumption from lighting? What's your energy consumption from HVAC system, from plug load, and so on and so forth. You can also do benchmarking and comparing the plug load for building A versus plug load from building B, and understand what are the outliers and help you prioritize in terms of initiatives. Yeah, next slide. I pass it to you, Nikki.
All right. Well, thank you, Youssef. What's very interesting, these are exciting times. We see cities, governments, companies recognizing the issues with climate change and how that is impacting their citizens and employees, and they're making carbon emission commitments. So it's very exciting. At the same time, these are very challenging times as well, because we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Employees are starting to see that the vaccination rates are increasing, employees and employers alike. And they want to bring employees back to work. Employees like myself are tired of being hunkered in my office at home and would love to have a change in scenery. But the challenge that this creates for building owners and employers is how do they create an environment which is a healthy environment and provides occupant comfort and safety, as well as being able to achieve those sustainability commitments. So how do companies find that balance? Let's talk a little bit about that. And the challenge that we see today is there's traditional HVAC systems, traditional building control systems that are essentially architected to be able to achieve single outcomes. For example, let's say your goal is sustainability and you want to reduce energy consumption. Then generally, the HVAC system would reduce the ventilation, and that would reduce the energy usage. However, on the other hand, if your goal is to be able to have a healthier building, to be able to stop infection, then the HVAC system would increase ventilation and outdoor air intake, which would then increase your energy consumption. So this creates a challenge because building owners and tenants need to be able to achieve multiple outcomes. So we need a new paradigm for building technology, and that's an area that we are very focused on. We recognize that the traditional system is optimizing for competing outcomes in the same space at the same time. And so we're very focused on innovation in this area, and we recognize that we really need a responsive variable control software that can handle multi-dimensional inputs and outputs. And you can see some of the multi-dimensional inputs here, being able to account for time of day, climate and season, equipment capacity, the current load, the anticipated load. How is the environment changing to be able to provide that employee or that employee a comfort environment that is optimized for energy usage? So that's an area that we're very focused on, and we recognize that this is the challenge. On top of this, ASHRAE has been very, very focused on looking at how to ensure or reduce the risk of infection and the spread of infection. And what they find is, there's no escaping this fact that when you increase fresh air ventilation, which is what ASHRAE highly recommends, you drive a double-digit increase in energy usage to get that air to the right temperature and the right humidity. The next challenge that building owners and tenants alike are facing, there's a lot of different drivers that are happening in the market. First, of course, is the COVID. COVID is a reckoning on the building environment because it impacts occupant health and occupant safety. Owners have to provide a safe environment, also superior comfort and productivity in order to remain relevant. Also, employees, we've gotten used to digitization. And so that's one of the things that employers have to provide is the same kind of experience that we've had with digitization. So how do physical spaces provide that standard of digital experiences that employees have gotten used to? And then, of course, we talked about climate change and the impact that climate change is having. So how do you also provide operational and efficiency and sustainability? So this is a challenge for building owners and tenants alike, is how do we achieve all of these different outcomes: building health, occupant comfort and productivity, operational efficiency and sustainability, given that the traditional systems and controls are focused on providing a single outcome at a time. So for example, let's say you optimize fresh air ventilation for occupant health. Then what happens is you're trading off on energy and cost, comfort, operational efficiency to get that fresh air to the right temperature and humidity level. Let's say, on the other hand, now you decide to conversely focus on energy savings and sustainability. Here, the trade-off is, as you can see, building health and occupant comfort and productivity, because now you have more pathogens from the respiratory aerosols and higher VOCs and CO2, which has a dramatic impact on cognitive performance and well-being after just 20 minutes in a meeting room. So what I want to do is play out an example of a building environment, how you could take into account all of these different outcomes: building health, occupant comfort and productivity, operational efficiency, and sustainability. So let's imagine it's 5 a.m. In the morning, and we have this is a hotel, and a soccer team shows up. Now at 5 a.m. in the morning, the HVAC system is probably optimized for max energy savings mode with a relatively high percentage of recycled air. But now suddenly a soccer team has shown up. There's 20 people. They're all checking in at the same time. When the team arrives, occupancy and environmental sensors and cameras in the lobby can generate sensor data from this activity. And that sensor data can detect, how many people have shown up, how that is changing the air environment. And using the sensor data, the system can then predict the pathogen risk based on the data and determine whether it will exceed the acceptable threshold in about 5 minutes. And if it does exceed that threshold, then the HVAC system could immediately switch from energy saving mode into instead of using recycled air, using outdoor air ventilation. That decision is then broken into coordinated instructions to the various components that are used by the HVAC system. So that is what allows, by having that kind of dynamic AI machine learning algorithm, we can start to make dynamic decisions and give you different outcomes based on the environment at that time and the situation at that time. So our goal is to deliver the building of the future. What was building controllers. What we want to move from building controllers to autonomous buildings that are autonomous by using sensors, collecting that automated data, being able to make automated decisions about the environment, moving from manual environmental controls to a safer and more secure environment, having industry standard approaches and practices to smarter data-driven business solutions. And then instead of being systems focused, being people focused. So this is where we're very focused on innovation and providing solutions that are AI-based and multimodal. So with multimodal optimization, being able to take in those different inputs, we can dynamically achieve the different outcomes that you need to be able to achieve and provide occupant safety as well as occupant comfort, and bring those employees back to work. Now, as Youssef mentioned, we have been focused on sustainability for quite some time. Our focus is making sure that you have solutions for accountability, efficiency, and resiliency. On the efficiency side, we have solutions that can help you do energy audit, benchmarking, and baselining. As Youssef took you through those steps 1 through 6, really looking at those different areas, looking at the building types that you may have, looking at the different components that you're using. What's the age of those components? Really auditing those components, helping you create a benchmark and baseline, and then providing an energy management solution that helps you measure your consumption and be able to compare that consumption with your costs, both historically as well as predict what those savings and costs could be in the future. And then implement energy and water conservation and facility improvement measures. And so those measures, as we go through the audit process, could be simple things, as Youssef mentioned, to upgrading lighting, to more complex things, such as, you have a 30-year boiler. If you upgrade that boiler, not only would you get an amazing ROI in the next 10 to 20 years, but you would also reduce your energy consumption and your carbon emissions. Then having energy optimization, you can't just audit, you can't just have an energy management solution in place and then implement the ECMs, but you want to make sure that you don't drift back and lose all of those savings and that you've achieved. So with energy optimization and predictive maintenance, we're constantly monitoring the system and optimizing the operations of those systems. And then moving into resiliency, as we've seen with climate change, business continuity and disaster resiliency is incredibly important. We need to make sure that, if you lose power, that you have a backup system, or in many regulated and non-regulated environment or deregulated environments, utilities are now giving incentives for businesses to be able to have their own solar or renewable energy solution, so that either in those time of day when the peak rates are very high, or when you lose that connectivity to the utility, you have backup to be able to continue to have business operations. And then on the accountability side, making sure that you are achieving those goals that you're setting. As Youssef talked about, we'll work with you to help you create those goals and set up those goals. But what we want to do is also make sure that we're monitoring those goals continuously and making sure that you're achieving the outcomes that you need to be able to achieve. Now, one of the things that we recognize that if we are going to help you achieve your sustainability goals, we have to walk the talk. So we have been doing that for quite some time, almost since the early 2000s. We've been very focused on our own carbon footprint and reducing that. We've made major strides, and in this year we actually made an announcement to reduce our carbon emissions by 2035. What we've already achieved is 90% reduction in Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions, a 70% improvement in energy efficiency. We've also saved 90 million across 5,700 gas and energy efficiency projects since 2010. We're also, water efficiency is incredibly important for sustainability. We've saved 128 million gallons of water. And we're not just focused on internally making sure that we're reducing our carbon emissions, but we want to make sure that we're building products that help you also reduce your carbon emissions. So 50% of our new product R&D is focused on creating solutions to improve sustainability and social outcomes. And overall, we have saved 200 million metric tons CO2 through our global adoption of Solstice products. So Solstice products are essentially green fuel products that lower greenhouse gas emissions. So I want to thank you for joining us today on this webinar. Hopefully this gives you an overall overview on how you can join in this sustainability, in addressing the sustainability challenges that we all face, and how you could go through having both healthier and sustainable buildings.
All right, Youssef, Nikki, we have a lot of questions. You mind if we go rapid fire? Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. Good.
Buckle up. Okay, so we got questions coming in from the delay feed. Henrietta, be ready in this order. Adele, it looks like Jennifer, Ashley, Fizz, and Christina, you had a question. So I just try to give a little heads up. Sam Chazen, alumni, SISE alumni 10 last year, and Henrietta had a similar question about technology. Just sort of, what are you seeing? Henrietta, do you want to ask your quick question?
Yes, thank you. And thank you very much for the presentation. That was really exciting to watch. We've had a lot of panels that have focused on themes and concepts and other ideas that include capital and policy and sustainability. But what are some of the specific technologies, and I know you kind of got into it a little bit, in the Honeywell pipeline that are interesting or exciting, for you? Thank you.
You want to take that one? I'll take that one, Nikki. Yeah, so I think, look, for the specific technologies we talked about, we're mostly focused on the software-based control, and mostly around machine learning and artificial intelligence. So the way is, one of the big problems is what Nikki described, is about how you take a you take the building as a multiple input, multiple output optimization model. And the goal is not to optimize one output, which could be energy costs or energy consumption, which used to be the case, but having a multiple output optimization that says, I want to optimize for healthy, that means reducing the pathogen risk, and I want to optimize for sustainability, I want to optimize for worker productivity, I want to optimize for comfort. But how do you do to optimize all these knowing there are pulling forces in different directions, right? If you want to be 100% healthy building, it's going to be very hard to be also sustainable, because healthy building means you're going to increase your outdoor air intake to the maximum, and therefore you're going to increase your energy consumption, and you're not going to be sustainable. So multiple input, multiple output is one area of focus. The second area of focus is about leveraging 5G technologies and how the 5G can help connect the buildings. For example, one of the examples is we use 5G technologies to start connecting the fire system and the fire panel of the building with 911 directly. So we don't need to have that building infrastructure. It goes straight to the air, it goes straight to the 911 system, and allow you to deploy forces and have corrective actions much faster than before. Another area is looking at how do you optimize the function of cooling within a building. It means not necessarily having optimizing the equipment itself, but also having a heat map of the building. Where are the people? What are the ones that are more active than the others? What's the emissions of CO2 and concentration? And having that heat map floor by floor and room by room, and define where is the thermal flows and what is the airflow, and how you define that airflow to goes from the equipment, the production of cold air, to the specific point of interest without having to cool the whole floor, etc. And basically, addressing a very simple problem that everyone has experienced. During a very hot summer, you go in a building, a mall or a restaurant, and you're cold and you have to wear your sweater. And that's exactly what we want to avoid. We want to reach that comfort that just give you that right temperatures, but knowing all those elements that allow you to understand that.
Thank you.
I think an area I would add, what we see, as you saw in Youssef's part, there's so many different ECMs, energy conservation measures that a customer can take. And I think where we see customers struggle is, well, which is the best ECM for me? So part of what we're developing is using IoT and all of these sensors and all the information that we're gathering at the building, using that real-time data to be able to then recommend the ECMs that would be the most valuable to the customer. And I think that's where we see customers really kind of get stuck on, okay, I understand I need to reduce my energy consumption, but how do I do that?
Okay, thank you, Nikki. So next question, Adele had a really interesting question about investing capital or committing to technology. Keep in mind, Youssef and Nikki, the previous panel, the investment finance community said they tend to avoid new technology investments, and yet here's Honeywell talking about technology. Adele, do you want to ask your question? I thought it's a really good question, especially in light of what we just heard.
Sure. Thank you both so much for your presentation. It was very interesting. My question was related more to the beginning stages of a project. And I know at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that sustainability is becoming a more attractive component for certain projects and investments. But I know that there's still the challenge of the high upfront costs with a lot of these new technologies and design plans. And I was curious if there was any work being done to support companies or customers who want to pursue these ventures but don't have the money sufficient enough in order to invest or to commit to these more sustainable designs. And then also on the flip side of that is the promise of a long-term profit through these more sustainable designs enough to convince companies or other organizations to invest in sustainable designs that may not have done it in the past or are not comfortable doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things that we think about a lot. We don't want capital to be a reason that customers don't move forward with sustainability projects. So what we try to do is we try to make sure we provide different financing options and different ways that and even ways that you're not reaching into your own capital. So, we have different types of programs. One is, where customers say, okay, I have capital, I want to use that. Or secondly, where they say, I don't want to use my capital. And there's kind of two different ways that we have. One is efficiency as a service. So essentially what that means is that you don't have to make any capital outlay. We'll make that outlay for you. And essentially the savings that you achieve over time, that's what will pay for the capital outlay that you made in the upfront. So there's different ways that we can essentially do on-book and off-book financing.
Okay, good. Okay, so question from Jennifer, be ready. Jennifer appreciates the efforts of Honeywell, but worries about maybe others not keeping up. I thought this is a great opportunity. Jennifer, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, so earlier in your presentation, you talked about how there were around like 800 businesses with science-based targets, and of course, that's great. It's a great start, I think. And in addition to the information provided, that ESG stocks and principles, that they result in generally higher profits, and how this is even aligning with growing customer demand for sustainability. I don't think 800 is a lot. So what do you think is stopping the thousands of other businesses from setting science-based targets?
No, I think it's a very good question, and it's not a lot when you come to all the number of companies that are in the, just public companies, for example. So there are different reasons. Number one, you have private companies that don't owe anything to the public. They don't need to report anything, not even their financials, let alone their commitment to specific targets. So the incentives to be sustainable is a little bit less than a public company having that Wall Street pressure. The second thing that inhibits that adoption of science-based targets is related just to the exposure and the risk of the brand if they don't do it. What if they don't do it? What's going to happen? And the reality of what we're going to see is most of the 800 companies are mostly B2C companies, because they have there is a brand recognition in the marketplace and in terms of consumers. But so more you go into the business to business, the only driver that's going to accelerate the sustainability science-based target adoptions is when you move to when you have those companies at the front line and dealing with customers, when they achieve their own target, which is scope 1 and scope 2 targets, they start putting also scope 3 targets, which is basically a target on their supply chain and all their suppliers. So now you have a ripple effect where the suppliers of those B2C companies, the B2B who serve B2C companies, will have to comply in order to be able to continue their business with those companies. So this is happening, and that's why you would see an acceleration. And 2x per year is already tremendous. But think about it, that just before 2015, there was nobody committing. And that acceleration, look at the compound annual growth rates, is something that is something that we have to recognize. It's not enough. We want to have 100% companies, but there are forces today that will make that number just keep growing every year.
All right.
Thank you.
Nikki, do you mind if I keep going? Nikki, I'm so sorry, but maybe
Oh,
you take
no,
this.
absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, so Ashley had a great question. Speaking for many of us, really appreciate Honeywell's steps 1 through 6. Really like that chart, by the way, this build the walk and then walk the walk. I think, Ashley, if I paraphrase, but I want you to ask it, she's asking, what about step 7? Go ahead, Ashley, go for it.
Sure. Thank you so much. I was worried about it's kind of the life cycle of your products, your sustainable products, and the technology that you're going to be using in your services, what the environmental impacts of them are when they're no longer usable. They were talking about it in a panel, and I was kind of wondering what Honeywell was considering in terms of this with your sustainable products.
Yeah. Nick, want to take that or?
So are you asking in terms of like having circularity in product?
Yeah, I think,
kind of
right,
like,
Ashley?
Also, and kind of like the makeup of the products themselves. They were talking about in a previous panel that solar panels are great for the environment, but once they're not usable anymore, a lot of the materials that they're made out of are very harmful to the environment when they're broken or unusable. So I wanted to know if you and your teams were considering that when looking at what to incorporate with your technology.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, with on the hardware side, we're looking at, well, first of all, one of the nice things I think at Honeywell, our technology tends to have a pretty long life cycle. If you look at, BMS and HVAC systems and so on, these are not products that have like the typical IT hardware 2 to 5 year life cycle. They tend to have a pretty lengthy life cycle. And then what we're always trying to make sure is that we have a longer and longer life cycle with those products and using components that are reusable. So we are definitely, very focused on that area.
Thank you.
And I think, we didn't get a chance to talk to, we have, a very full roadmap, but very full capabilities. There's jet fuels, for example, that we're developing that use natural, instead of using oils, they're using algae to create the jet fuel. And then once the jet fuel is used, then our goal is to recycle that and use it for plastics. So we definitely have, different initiatives on the circularity perspective as well, internally and externally.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you. All right, we're running out of time. We have so many questions. So Youssef and Nikki, we're going to go to Fitz. Fizz had a great question about your current, but also planning for, is sort of a current, present, and future approach, which is challenging, I would imagine, for a company like Honeywell or all of us. How do we prepare for the present and future? Fizz, I really like your question. Let's go to you.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I have like 2 questions. One is just a follow-up from the first one. So the question is, do you evaluate sustainability or carbon dioxide reduction impact from a cumulative urban carbon dioxide minimization aspect as well? Since some buildings may be moving towards sustainability while at the same time existing low-performing or non-retrofitted buildings could be neutralizing the overall progress and slowing down the current efforts that everyone is making. Having said that, how do different climates factor into planning decisions for a new building? Like, is the HVAC design for a building in Portland based on historic or unprecedented temperatures, or do you factor in new data for the next 50 to 100 years? Thank you.
So we don't do a cumulative urban, but we do cumulative across an asset portfolio. So our customers, they sort of, when they take a service or when we partner with them, it's about helping them in a journey and putting that measurement and control part, so they can control across their assets. But they own the data; it's their data, and today they're not they're not obliged to share their energy bill, a utility bill across every single building in every single city. They don't do that. So it's just data privacy for us. We can't just take all those data and share them to the city and for what? Who's the buyer? I mean, what's the market for that? I mean, I think we need to have a need. We need to have a customer. We need to develop an offering that addresses a specific need of a specific segment of customers. Having that, we haven't seen that yet. But we have seen at the city level, we've seen cities looking for ways to control the buildings and interact with the buildings in order to reduce the not reduce, but smoothen the load needed for that specific city. So for example, when you think about it, like let's say there is a surge in power because there is a storm. So therefore it's getting cold and everybody's gonna start heating their buildings, all the building at once. So where do you get that power if the energy is not available, if the utility companies in that specific area does not have that sufficient capacity to provide all that surge? So we do see technologies that say, like we call them grid interactive technologies or demand response technologies, that, for example, you can put controllers in water heaters that will say, hey, you know what, you don't need to heat the water for the next 2 hours because we need that electricity for other purposes, and you can start heating after 2 hours. So how do you talk to the different system that you have in a house or in an industrial or in a building environment, and they talk and coordinate the needs and the way that the energy is being consumed and the timing and the scheduling of this, so you can shift loads in order to make the curve a little bit smoother as opposed to peaks and valleys.
It is hard though, isn't it, Youssef and Nikki, because we had two panelists from Portland, as Fiz was pointing out, who said that they've never seen temperatures like this, that things are melting, green leaves are dropping, and yet they're planning to build a building. How do you anticipate 118 degrees? Well, you're not building buildings in Siberia, but that's where how do you that's. And then Sebastian had a good point. Science-based metrics, these are hard, right? Because science is saying we've got these temperatures, but you have B2B and B2C customers that say, no, I'm not going to plan for 110 degrees in Portland. Does that make sense, Youssef and Nikki?
Yeah, but I think that's where having sensors and getting real-time data is so important now, especially with this climate change. We can no longer rely on that, from May to August or June to August, it'll be the summer, and this is what the temperature will be, and this is where we can have our HVAC systems operate at, right? We need to have sensors that are constantly collecting sensors and submeters and meter data that's providing real-time information, and we're making decisions about the building operations in real time. I think that's where that becomes really, really critical.
I mean, you show them the data, right? Here's the data. Go ahead, Youssef.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I think, also just a couple of answer a little bit of all the other questions that we addressed before, but in another angle, when you think about different industries and different companies, there are many of them that are operating at a low single-digit margin, right? They probably making 5%. Operating margin up to 8%, maximum 10%, right? Most of the companies, mostly the locals, the small business owners, and so on and so forth, they operate around those margins. So if you want to make them sustainable, we're basically asking them to buy biodiesel instead of diesel, which costs up to 50% more expensive. Biojet fuel, it costs up to 70% more expensive. Buying renewable energy as opposed to fossil fuel energy from the utility company costs about 30 to 40% expensive. But you can't get to you can't secure on margin, so that's also a challenge about what's the business, business sense of such decisions, even though at heart they want to be sustainable. Then, what are the things that are doable and feasible that will still maintain a healthy business that's making some money, or we put them in the red? So I think that's not a easy questions. But as Nikki mentioned, there are solutions that are funded or partly funded by the government with the new regulations. There are solutions that have a fast ROI, so therefore it will pay for itself and generate. But definitely, if those companies with very small margins aiming for carbon neutrality, it's a myth. I mean, with current cost base of such initiative, it's not going to be possible. But 20-30%, it could be doable with all the incentives coming into play and picking the right technology on that abatement curve that have the fast ROI. That is something within reach.
We are over time. Youssef, Nikki, I'm going to speak for Gracie really quickly. Gracie, one of the fellows, asks many of the panelists if they're optimistic or worried and concerned. Just really quickly, what's your sense? Optimism or concerned? Neither answer is right or wrong. We've had an equal balance of both responses. Just curious. Gracie, sorry, but I just thought since we're way over time.
I mean, we own the future. The future is what we make it, right? So if we don't take the actions and we believe in those actions, we believe in the vision and the purpose of what are we pursuing, we will be pessimistic for sure. But I am very bullish and optimistic because we own the future and it's up to us to change it. We have the technology, we have the resources, we have the support, and we have the customer asking for it. I think so. From now on, it's only getting better, I think, and much more, bullish in terms of leaving a legacy and a clean planet to our kids.
Nikki, do you?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm pretty optimistic as well, and I think for me the big difference is just the level of involvement I'm seeing from the cities around the world, governments that are realizing the impact of climate change and creating regulations. And I'm not just talking about North America. I see this everywhere in Europe and India and Australia, like everywhere around the world. And then companies. I think that's been, I would say, in the past couple of years, the biggest laggard, and that's where I'm seeing a major shift. Is that companies are coming in, and especially I think on the, as we talked about in the beginning, BlackRock is, one of the biggest investment firms. For them to make a statement that they're going to make sure that the companies that they're investing in have ESG initiatives, and they're going to continue to focus on that area. That's huge. I think so. To me, I'm optimistic because, I think that's what it takes to tackle climate change and sustainability, is really getting everybody's focus on solving this issue. And I'm seeing that as a major change in the last couple of years.
Nikki, Youssef, we went way over. That's good. A lot of great questions. Only got to some of them. Fellows, you fantastic. We had questions that came from the delayed feed.